Hello, and thank you. Welcome to the Build a Better Book webinar. I'm really excited today to share, to have you guys share your wealth of knowledge on this topic. So just a little bit about how I learned about it was, I think I saw Ian's Caterpillar post, and he kept saying build a better book, and I didn't really know what it meant. I was just like, oh, build a better book, and kind of was like, that sounds cool. And then at South by, I saw Janet, and she was like, you got to come to this session. And I came to your session, Stacy. So all the little wrap up. And I'm sorry, and Kat. We should have listed her as another person. No. So just giving you, this is the real thing now. This is recording. I am not editing out the bunny ears. So yeah, so I saw you guys at South by, and then I'm excited to learn more and kind of share more about Build a Better Book. I didn't realize before at the very beginning when I heard the term, I thought of it sort of like novel engineering, which is totally different. So maybe that should be a webinar too, because that would be cool. But I do know that it's such a great tool for accessibility, and so I'm really excited about it. I'm going to let each of you, introduce yourselves. Do you want me to pull up the slideshow now, or do you want to introduce yourselves first? Or is that part of your slideshow?
I can do a quick intro now, maybe.
Yeah, let's do a little quick intro. So Stacy, you go first.
All right, hi, I'm Stacy Forsyth. I'm here with some of my partners in crime on Build a Better Book, Kat Penscover and Gigi Young from CU Science Discovery here at CU Boulder. And yeah, we run at CU Science Discovery, we run a whole variety of informal K-12 STEM education programming for students and teachers. And we've been involved in the Build a Better Book project for the past several years and have worked with Janet at the Boulder Public Library quite a bit. And we're excited to now be working with Ian, a new partner who we actually connected with on the Makey Makey Educators Facebook page when we saw some of his cool projects. So was a great way to connect with other folks doing similar things.
Yeah, so let's talk about Ian. Ian is a super amazing Makey Makeyer. Makey Makeyer, that was a word I just made up. I forgot I didn't introduce me and Tom, but I think that we've been on the webinars enough. We're both from Joy Labs, aka Makey Makey. But Ian is one of our Makey Makey ambassadors and makes really cool projects all the time, and is just doing such phenomenal work in New Jersey, even though I tried to lump him as a Coloradan. Did I say it right?
We'll take him.
All right, so you're an honorary Coloradan now, Ian. So go ahead and tell us a little bit about your makerspace in your library.
Great, thank you very much for the wonderful introduction, Colleen. So I run the Mountain Lakes Public Library Makerspace for the past 3 years. And I started using Makey Makey and Scratch just to work with little kids or really all grades, because it was a great tool to quickly really introduce and engage students to programming, which has been phenomenal because now in town programming is taught in first grade already. But 3 years ago when we started, programming was taught in 6th grade. I really feel that with all of the emphasis on Makerspace resources we had and using Makey Makey and programming and showing how the two combine together, it was really so engaging that parents, kids, teachers were like, yeah, programming, we get it, and all the Makerspace resources. So I've been, working with a lot of different ages on Makey Makey projects, and they're a lot of fun, and I'm really happy to share a lot of the projects today that can be adapted a little bit more once universal design thinking is attached to it, and then also a couple projects that I've been working on. So I'm excited to share those today.
Awesome. And Janet is from Building 61, also in Boulder, back with Stacy. I should have got y'all lumped in the same intro. And I actually got to visit Building 61, which is part of the Boulder Public Library it was like 3 summers ago now when ISTE was in Denver. And it was like, the library is a beautiful space, but the makerspace is just like completely magical. So Janet, do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you. Yes. So I'm here in Boulder, Colorado, although like Ian, I'm a New Jerseyan. So we've got some interesting alliances for me.
I didn't know that. Awesome.
So I'm one of the creative technologists here at Building 61. As Colleen said, we're part of the Boulder Library Makerspace. We've got everything from laser cutters to 3D printing, screen printing, airbrushing, and then a full wood shop with CNC machine, joiner, planer, and more industrial equipment as well. So it's kind of the whole gamut. We run a lot of different programs, from focus workshops to open studios, where we're here to support and guide patrons through the space to get their ideas to fruition. We also do have amazing partners like the University of Colorado and CU Science Discovery, where we get to do some special internships, and that was how we got turned on to the Build a Better Book project, which has really informed a lot more. It was not really an isolated event. It has informed so much about how we think about accessibility in our space, and how we frame all of the internships and projects that we do here. So
I also remember that when I came, that you guys have one of the best focuses on community that I've ever seen a library actually do. Like every library says they have a community focus, but your library really does a great job of that, and getting all ages of people. And so my main point here is that there was a master craftsman there when I came to visit. He was probably 85, 90 years old, and he was using a laser cutter on his handmade wooden object that I was just like, this is so cool. Like, this is what a makerspace is supposed to be. So I had to give y'all one last shout out. So I'm going to start the slide share, hopefully. And this is one of those things where I get really bad at what I'm doing. Oh, I got it. Okay, so I'm sharing it, and you should see the Build a Better Book webinar slide share now. And I want it to be big, full screen though. So everybody can see it? It's black, but it's coming there. You can see it. Just for everybody who's on the call, if you lose your little Zoom window, it either moves to the top or to the bottom, and you can change if you want to have just one person be in your view or 4 people right there. And then also on the chat, if you want to ask questions, go ahead and just type your questions in there, and make sure that you type for all participants, unless you want to be only speaking to me or Tom or something. So, all right, I'm going to let y'all go. I guess I'll just you'll have to either say next, or I'll have to intuitively know when to to move this.
All right. I think we can move on to the next one.
Yes, yeah, we introduced ourselves.
Yes. All right, so I'm going to kick things off and just provide a little bit of an overview about the Build a Better Book project, and then I want to hand it off and have most of the time be with Janet and Ian, so every week everyone can see a little bit more about some of the different projects that have been kind of created through Build a Better Book, and in particular the ones that have incorporated Makey Makey in different ways. But the Build a Better Book project is really all about bringing purpose into the makerspace and connecting youth makers with a real world need. You can see here is a kind of a sample storyboard. This is a kind of tactile story that was created using a variety of different maker tools during a summer program at Building 61. And so you can see several different elements, including laser cut board, 3D printed features, a lot of handcrafted features, which are really important in terms of adding texture to tactile stories. There's also sound incorporated, and Braille, which was just done by hand. So a lot of different tools that the students are using typically throughout a program in the course of creating some of these projects. Okay, I think Colin, you could go to the next slide. So Build a Better Book is essentially a maker education outreach program that grew out of an earlier initiative here at CU Boulder that was started by a partner of ours in computer science called the Tactile Picture Books Project. And this project was really essentially a test to see whether we could use 3D printing as a way of creating effective tactile picture books for children who are blind. So Tom was a computer scientist working in the area of human-computer interaction and working on developing more accessible software, and wanted to see, if 3D printing, as 3D printers became more ubiquitous, could we use that as a way of doing this? And you can see that some of the earlier versions, here you have Goodnight Moon, Harold and the Purple Crayon, and a slide from Dear Zoo. Those early books were essentially just using 3D printing to create a raised version of an existing picture from a picture book. And oftentimes that is not not the most effective way to communicate an image. If you think about how children's illustrations are done, they're often a lot more abstract and sometimes can be tricky to kind of communicate in a tactile way. Okay, next. So over the past few years, we essentially teamed up with Tom as a way of trying to engage more teens in technology and using this idea of creating tactile picture books as a hook for engaging teens in some of our technology classes. We began working with the library Makerspaces like Janet at Building 61, as well as some other local partner libraries, and really kind of saw an interest in teens in this initiative. And we were able to kind of team up and acquire some NSF funding that has supported the project over the past few years through an iTest grant. So we've since been running a variety of workshops at libraries, on campus, summer camps. We've done some multi-week internship types of programs for teens in collaboration with both the library and the Museum of Boulder. And essentially kind of throughout all these programs, really the idea is getting kids to think about how do you design something for someone else? How do you design for people with varied abilities? And in particular, how would you design for someone who can't see? So we often take our sight for granted, take for granted that we can see a lot of images, but thinking about how can we communicate information that is often visual in ways that might make use of other senses. So it began, as I've said, with 3D printing and with tactile features, but we also soon realized that we could do a lot with other maker tools, and then also by adding sound as well, that audio would present a lot of opportunity. So here you see a couple of different shots, one from a summer camp on the left. That was a middle school student who designed a pretty amazing tactile version of an Eric Carle book called A Very Busy Spider. It was primarily done with 3D printing, but also some handcrafting and using 3D printing pens to add texture and other elements. And then on the right, a couple of shots from Building 61, where students were working to create more accessible exhibit components for the Museum of Boulder. So the girls on the top are working on a game to communicate information about the Kepler telescope, and the girls below are working on exhibit panels related to celestial seasonings, so talking about herbs and plants and things like that. Next. So in designing, I know you like this image. In designing tactile graphics, as I mentioned, the earlier kind of project really just focused on making raised versions of an original picture. And often that isn't effective, and it has become a much more challenging design task to really think about how do you create an effective tactile graphic. And so for all of our workshops, whether we're working with students or with adults, we start out with a number of different introductory activities to get them thinking about designing for others and to get them thinking about, if you're communicating something in a tactile way, what are the key features of what you're trying to communicate? So what would you need to include to make sure that someone who is blind could understand what they're feeling? So these are just a few sample images from a game we sometimes play using wiki sticks to do a game of what we call tactile Pictionary, where one person is creating a tactile version of something and someone else who is blindfolded is trying to distinguish what that is. And they have some context. So in this case, they might know that it's an animal. But you can see here are three very different pictures created by different participants, one of whom was blind in this exercise. And so you can see, you might think about if you're trying to communicate what a pig is, you might do that just by the face of a pig and emphasizing the snout or the ears. You might try to do the whole body of the pig and represent the shape and the curly tail. Or maybe it's just the curly tail that you need, and really that is the key feature that's going to distinguish a pig from other animals. So getting kids to think about, I might not be able to create this elaborate illustration in a tactile way, but what are the most critical features that I need to include?
Stacy, this was the part of the workshop at South by that really kind of blew me away when we put on the blindfolds and we had to make something with the wiki stick, and then we had to either we made it or we had to just feel what it was. And I think I was actually sitting by Janet, and she told me, if you make a curly tail for the pig, that is what someone who is blind would actually see the most versus you trying to do this whole pig. It's just faster and quicker. And I think in a comprehensive way, that's kind of an amazing trick to give our students too, right? Here's how can we distill what is a pig with the smallest amount of wiki stick. And like, what a wiki stick is, it's just like a wax covered stick. But how can we do that in such a way that someone who's blind is going to know immediately that's a pig? Like, that's a pretty cool, teaching moment just in of its own. So
I think these images might have been from your group, Ian. Were these from, Ian might have been in this group at this workshop. The picture on the left that just has the curly tail, that was created by Eli, who was a participant in our workshop and is blind, and that was kind of the key element for him. One of the other things that we like about this exercise is when we do this with teens as kind of an introductory exercise, typically they come up with all of the key criteria that help them figure out, you know, what it was. And so they quickly learn that that orientation is key. You know, if someone hasn't told them which way is up, it's almost impossible for them to figure out what it is. Context is really important. So if you don't know that you're trying to figure out that it's an animal, you know, it's really difficult to figure out what that might be versus anything in the world. You know, size and scale, they're thinking about, it gets them really identifying what are the key things that they need to be aware of as they start working on making tactile graphics. So we can go to the next one. So I mentioned it really started out just making tactile books. We soon realized that audio has a lot of, you know, adds this whole other layer, both in terms of what we can communicate through audio, as well as the tech we can do. So we can start teaching kids about circuits and switches, and there's a lot more tech design that they can do, but we're also really enhancing the projects with interactivity. And so sometimes students are adding narration, sometimes they're adding music, sometimes they're adding sound effects, but it really opens up a lot of opportunity, and this is where Makey Makey really provides a fun, you know, is a fun tool to add to the project. So these are just a couple of tactile fables created by elementary students, and they were adding sound effects to enhance the story using Makey Makey and Scratch.
Oh, I wonder if our chat window people can guess the books.
Oh, which fable?
Yeah, which fable?
Good question.
That's your chat.
Your chat challenge.
Your chat challenge. I'm trying to figure out what this is with the butt. It looks like butter back here. A butter and a chicken.
I don't know what that is. Oh yeah, tortoise in the hair. Okay, yeah, we got one.
Tortoise in the hair, good. Oh yeah, and this looks like brown bear. So I know it's not brown bear because it's a fable, but it just makes me think of that. Maybe because you already said Eric Carl. The other one, that has to be a chicken back there behind that rabbit.
Oh, Boy Who Cried Wolf, good guess. It's actually the wolf and the lamb.
Ah.
But you got the wolf. And then a lot of cotton for the texture of the lamb there. These are just a few sample projects so you can get a sense of some of the different tools and technologies that students have been using in the project. Oh, yeah, right here. One of the things that we've really liked about this project and what we like to tell to librarians or educators that are interested in working with the project is that there's no one technology that you need to have. This started out as an effort that was using 3D printing, but really there are so many different tools that are really helpful in different aspects of this project. They have different affordances, and it, I think, helps make this project more accessible to a lot of different people in terms of what you might have in your particular makerspace or at your school. So a few of the examples, the project on the top left there is a pretty elaborate game, an original game that was created during a week-long summer internship at Building 61. And that, as you might be able to tell, has a laser cut game board. It has 3D printed elements. It had sound, and not only sound, you know, it was wired so that as your piece, your copper covered piece moved along the soundboard, it would trigger different sound cues to let you know what was happening to your character essentially in that story. And then it also had instructions in English, Spanish, and Braille. So it was a pretty amazing project that really incorporated a lot of different technologies. There's an image of that tactile picture book I showed earlier. We've used molding as just kind of a way to do some early tactile activities, as well as sometimes scanning 3D objects so that they can be 3D printed. again, incorporating sound. We have a few shots of that down below, and then some paper crafting, pop-ups using a craft cutter. So a lot of different tools that people have used. And then, can you play that video, Colleen? Here's another sound tool. Oh, the volume's not working.
I think Colleen's on mute.
Oh.
Yeah, Colleen, you're on mute.
Oh.
Well, she's like, I can hear it.
I'm like, I hear it. I know what's wrong. It's me. Technical difficulties. There you go. Can you hear it now? That's really cool.
So that's just a simple example created with Spectrum's rings. These are rings that use color cues that you can program with different sounds, and it all works through an app on your phone. So an easy kind of portable way to integrate sound to a book in a way that is easily portable and easily shared too. Okay, and I think, and just a couple of things that we found to be really important for the success of the program, you know, again, in thinking about designing for others, providing an opportunity for the team designers to get feedback from users in their community. So when possible, we try to bring in community mentors who are blind or visually impaired so that they can kind of test out the products and give feedback to the teams so that they have a chance to iterate on their designs and make improvements. And just wanted to, if you're interested in working with a project or getting more information, we do have a website. We have some additional resources as well as an online design gallery with digital files for some of the products that students have designed. And I have the web address on the next slide. And here's just a picture of our awesome cohort. We did a PD workshop for librarians and educators this past spring. We were fortunate to have Ian join us for that and also to take a field trip to Building 61. And also just wanted to mention, we're participating in a STEM for All video showcase this week that is put on by NSF. We're one of more than 200 projects that have these little 3-minute videos about what's happening. So I've included the link for our video, but it's also a great place to just kind of check out other STEM education projects that are happening all around the country.
Very cool.
Awesome. Okay, well, I'll pick up with kind of what we focus on here at Building 61 and how that connects back to the Build a Better Book project. So some of the guiding principles that we have here that are really behind, I don't know, I would kind of say everything that we do, are how do we activate our technologies with purpose? And so working with Build a Better Book was doing exactly that, where we're not just 3D printing, you know, things that don't really have meaning beyond, you know, the object itself. How do we actually design things that are going to help others? So can we do that by sharing stories? You know, how do we make the mode of making a vehicle for storytelling? Because that's a very compelling and powerful way to connect with students and to get their buy-in. And then, you know, as I said earlier, to solve wicked problems, to figure out, you know, what collectively we want to address and who we want to work with and what is that going to look like. One thing about that too is to just say, like, especially when you're working with students, you know, I think that there's a lot of, I don't know, sometimes there's a notion of we're preparing students to do important work later, but they should be doing it right now. Like, that's what we should be doing. So to actually engage in the Build a Better Book project was exactly that, where we were making real projects that were in collaboration with the Colorado Center for the Blind. And these stories and universal board games that we were making were being utilized by students with various abilities. So, you know, building empathy into, you know, design thinking practice is something that we think about a lot. This takes a lot of different forms. So the woman on the left is Luann, and she's a local artist, and she was a collaborator and mentor for the Build a Better Book project here. She is an incredible individual, and we ended up just through this partnership with the University of Colorado and the Center for the Blind, we ended up hiring Luann to be a maker in residence here last spring. And she ran a series of workshops for the general public. And I think that that's really powerful too, to see, because whoever you are, wherever you are, however you're engaging with the Build a Better Book project, it's going to take a direction that you might not anticipate. And that's really, really cool. And that's what happened here. So working with Luann, we were thinking about how do we make not only maker technologies purposeful in solving, difficult challenges in our community, but how do we make the interface of our technologies more accessible? That's not something that's necessarily given a lot of consideration in Makerspaces, and I think it's really, really important to do that. And I don't know if you can see me and the slides at the same time, but we used these sensation blackboards, which are really just a rubberized, very simple blackboard. But you can look these up and buy them. They're called sensational blackboards. And they allow you to draw on them and kind of break paper so that it becomes kind of a very low textured relief. And from there, we would scan Luann's drawings that she would make. So, sometimes they were of horses and various scenes. She was working on a storyboard. And so that's what she's touching in front of you and in front of herself in that picture. So we would laser cut these objects with heavy relief on the drawn lines, and then I would work with her to figure out how we wanted to cut around the objects. So that was something that started to emerge in terms of how do we make our technologies themselves more accessible. And then this idea of, design projects, they should all be universal design projects. I think everybody benefits, every learner is different, and everybody benefits when there are different modalities for interfacing with a story, whether that's sound, texture, smells, other various means as well. Okay, you can go to the next. So some of the prompts that we have curated to sort of foster that from our students, and this is students young and old. We work with people of all ages, as Colleen said earlier, but we encourage everybody to challenge themselves in these ways with whatever they're working on, to ask these questions. Who is it for? Who can or cannot participate? What are the implicit biases that we have? As Stacy said earlier, we so often assume that everybody can see, and if we can see, everybody can see. How can you make something more accessible? How can we challenge ourselves in that way? And how can we do that by collaboration? So how do we do that? One of the things that we say a lot around here is accessibility should not be retrofit. It should really be emergent and together and collaborative. So it's so important that we are working with mentors who are visually impaired or blind when we're doing projects like this, or students from all different abilities and backgrounds. And then finally, what story do you want to tell? So the form that the Build a Better Book project took here was to make games. Students wanted to make games, and we said, okay, let's do that. That's a way of storytelling. And so the young woman on the left is Atson, and she is using the swell machine to create some Braille instructions for her game. And the woman on the right is Michelle, and she's doing a board game that was kind of a traveling around the Boulder area, and there are soundboards that are built into her design, and she's drilling out the holes to wire the copper tape through.
These are great prompts, and I want to say that the who can and cannot participate just really opens up such a big world of thought that I think most of our students never really engage in. Except for when they're on the end of the can't participate, right? Like, right. Even without like health issues or other things, like there are definitely times when you can't participate in something and it upsets you, right? So it's just such a great way to word that prompt for accessibility. So I wanted to make that comment because it's so
yeah.
good.
And as I said, we talk about this openly with everybody that's in our community, and we've seen some pretty interesting modes where people who are working on startups or launching a business are changing some of the ways that they're thinking about their products.
That's cool.
And I think that's really cool, and that really goes back to what it feels like in a makerspace, in a community space, whether it's a school, a library, or somewhere out in the wild. I think that the culture that you establish is based on these prompts. It's about talking about these things out loud.
Mm-hmm.
Did I freeze, or are we good? Can you?
No, you're good.
Okay, good, cool.
We're also listening to you.
Okay.
Pretty raptured.
I think my screen is like having a hard time here, so it just looks like I was stuck in space and time. So yes, anyway, I think that it's really important creating this culture of Skillshare. It's amazing. So it's not only, like what technologies are you using and engaging with, whether they're soundboards or 3D printing or laser cutting or screen printing, but it's also, what skill set do you have to offer someone else? So as Stacy was saying earlier with that one particular board game that came out of this summer work, instructions were in English, Spanish, and Braille. Well, part of that was because we had an amazing student in the group whose first language was Spanish. So to kind of recognize that we should be celebrating that, and that's an amazing skill that they can now add and grow the audience even further by sharing that and celebrating that, that's really powerful. So I think it's really important to respect one another in these spaces and to kind of be, very open to students and people of all backgrounds informing a process. So you can kind of see the messy underbelly on the left here of one of the projects that two young men were working on, doing a football game. And then on the right is a road trip across the country. That was a story that two young women were sharing about their travels from Mexico to the United States. And so different things happen along the way. You draw different cards and get to kind of get a little insight into some of the funny stories that happened in their life. And so just, one of the things that we've learned here too is making sure that you leave time for celebration that can celebrate out, to recognize what the students are doing, but also again, like further that impact, further that Skillshare, get it back into the community, because we don't want to be doing these projects in a vacuum. I think it's really important that when we present, in this case, we presented the students' games at the Latinx Festival last summer in Boulder, and there were thousands and thousands of people coming through the streets. It's so important to make time to say, this is what we are valuing, this is what we are doing, this is what games look like. This isn't just, something that's for an individual, this is something that is for a whole community. So that's something that I think it really validates the students, it's really empowering, and it just gives them some agency to talk about their work in a way that's different. And I think that it enlightens a lot of people in the community too that might not be thinking about some of these challenges that we're faced with.
Okay, thank you, Janet. So I'm going to share today a good amount of videos of projects that students have worked on and some that I've worked on. And I like what Janet, obviously, and Stacy said all about Build a Better Book, which is just a phenomenal program that by looking at some of the videos today that I have, a lot of them were built by students or myself before I knew about Build a Better Book. And now that I do, by just applying universal design thinking, which is really easy once you start thinking about it, and you start thinking about, okay, how can I design with all of my senses instead of just sight? And you have all these great Makerspace resources, which for the most part, a lot of Makerspace resources are not that expensive now that you have access to, that you really can take a project idea and make it accessible for visually impaired student or hearing impaired, or someone who speaks different languages, or someone who's lefty maybe. So a lot of different ways to make these projects accessible. And I really like what Janet said also to finish off, which was you start with an idea how you're going to work on the Build a Better Book projects, but students definitely have a way of taking them in a new direction, which I will finish up my part of the presentation at the end, which I'm really excited for a project that we're going to start next week. So I've done a good amount of work, like Colleen said before, on a wonderful introduction with Makey Makey and Scratch. We'll see that if you give a dog a donut video in a minute. But mostly I've been working on Makerspace resources, whether it's 3D printing, digital cutting, squishy circuits, using different types of materials, 3D pens, Makey Makeys, soundboards, lots of different resources, having students just work with them and just learning and how to explore with them. But once I learned about Build a Better Book and also went to Tom's Makey Makey Train the Trainer seminar, it really struck home how easy it is to take universal design thinking and apply it to our projects. So we'll go to the next slide. And this was one of the project before I knew about Build a Better Book. It was a project that a Spanish teacher asked fourth grader to work on. And it basically is a little quiz game where the Spanish word is spoken, and then you have to click on the correct English translation. And then, the program says correcto or no está correcto. So it was a good example to me to demonstrate, and also fortunately to the teaching staff, that kids can really use different modes of technology to express creativity and knowledge. As we go to the next slide. So working at the public library, it was really clear to me that literature obviously is very important to build community. And I really felt that there's a lot of unique ways to build engagement for kids to learn about books that they haven't read before or they have read. So I challenged a group of high school students to work on, to choose children's literature and bring it to life. And here's the video of the production that they created.
This is a thing with Harry Potter, and if you click on different characters, they tell you about their life. Yeah?
Ron Weasley is Harry Potter's roommate and best friend at Hogwarts. He comes from a large family of wizards. He sticks by Harry through the difficult first days of school.
Hermione Granger is another close friend of Harry Potter. She's a very bright and dedicated student. Her skill of witchcraft is helpful to Harry when he lands in tricky situations early in the school year.
So great voices.
Yeah, I really love this project. It was the first time I'd worked with high school students. I didn't know what to expect. And it was phenomenal because they learned so quickly after a 25-minute introduction, because it was a group of 4 students. Only one had a little bit of programming experience beforehand, and they did a phenomenal job, including those illustrations of Harry Potter characters using graphite pencil. Now, they worked on this before I knew about Build a Better Book and was really thinking about universal design thinking. But clearly, we could take this project and those high school students now looking at those prompts that Janet had before, and the students that could start thinking, okay, well, how do I add additional senses to this? Obviously, they can still have the beautiful graphite pencil illustrations, but now they can use different textile and textures to bring those characters to life for more students. So I think this is kind of project that is interactive, but then once you start applying the prompts that Janet was talking about, students can easily make it accessible to many different students. So next was a project, a giant map project that we have lots of families who come from all parts of the world to live in Mountain Lakes and go to school here. So we thought it would be a really cool idea to have this map and have students and their families speak in different languages. So we can play the video. One of our local Dutch families. So this was a lot of fun, this project, and kids loved it. We had it up, we had it as an activity, then we had families come in, as they came into the public library, they would be able to add in their voices and learn a bit about programming and Makey Makey and circuitry, but also create this project really without knowing a whole lot about Build a Better Book. But now, again, it's a project that right now it's just two-dimensional, but with a little extra design thinking, we could definitely make this into a tactile experience that can be used for visually impaired learners in many different ways. So I'm excited to actually take this project and do that at some point, probably this fall.
And some people are asking in chat if like this is going to be available afterwards. So really fast, I just wanted to say that yes, I will share the slide deck in the blog post that initially I had sent out. I'll put that and the whole webinar recording in that, just in case anyone has to go. So you ready for the next slide?
Yes, let's go.
Yeah. I'm thinking about those wiki sticks and the map, and like how can I make, like even thinking about terrain, like how I could make tactile versions of Africa. Like what does Africa feel like? What is the and then they're taking in a school-wide phenomenon, you're taking in like, what is this environment like, right? Like you're doing so much with that. Such a cool idea.
Yes, so I'm really excited because like you said, there's a lot the students will be able to do with it. This is the very Makey pillar, which is one of the videos that Stacy first saw that she asked me to share with Build a Better Book. And of course I said yes.
All right. I think this one's really quiet too, so if anyone's having trouble with the videos, you'll hear them better too afterwards. All the links will be there.
You gotta do it on these things right here. These things. Oh, I see. See why?
So when Stacy contacted me about this project to share, of course I said yes, and this really began my thinking and journey of, okay, universal design. This is clearly interactive. There's different fruits that the child can touch. It may be tough to see, but there's a crafted caterpillar that's used to interact with and get the sounds to be triggered. So, and of course you can make your caterpillar in many different ways that are very textured. Another good project for working with visually impaired students, so they can be part of the project, right? It's not just for visually impaired students, it's to be created with visually impaired students. So, and just like we discussed earlier, or I believe Stacy and Janet discussed earlier, it's tough to just take a direct image from a book and page by page recreate it, but you don't have to. You can create these unique experiences that are great for visually impaired students, but also for young learners to take a different perspective from the book, and where it's not, you don't have to read each page, but instead you kind of take a synopsis of the book or a scene and you can bring it to life with a little bit of programming, a Makey Makey, a soundboard, 3D printing. Okay, next. All right, so here's one, if you give a dog a donut. Very simple. This was a middle school Build a Better Book project in December. About 2 hours they worked on this. And then the next slide is Yertle the Turtle. This was also a middle school project for about 2 hours.
build his tower higher. The turtles want to be done, but Yertle wants to build higher. Mac the turtle on the bottom feels squished. Mac is ready to
So this was a good project, good starting point for these students in learning about universal design. It had about 2 to 2.5 hours. You know, it's interesting because if you give a dog a donut, that student was more interested in the art and how to recreate a donut and a dog for a visually impaired student. And these students were more interested in programming, kind of like a unique expression of getting these turtles to build up and then fall over. As you can see, first prototype, but not bad for 2.5 hours. It would be really cool in a Makerspaces to get these two groups together, students who kind of are a little more artistic, and then you have students who like the programming and robotics side. If we can actually get them to work together, I think we really can have them create some magnificent actual interactive book and game experiences for all learners. And then next slide.
That's really cool because they did the layering thing, which is how I did my fraction generator. And you don't really see very many people thinking about combining key presses on Makey Makey. So it's kind of like a next step so if that was their first time using it, that's pretty cool. They did that.
Yes, and they did have to think about that because at first what they tried wasn't working because it was a little more complex.
The code does not work the way you think it's going to.
But I really feel like the Makerspace is great because we can get the kids who are into art and then combine with robotics and programming, we really can make some amazing interactive experiences.
Yeah, I agree.
Designing for visually impaired students, where to start. You know, I learned so much being at the Build a Better Book conference and talking especially with Leslie, Neil, and Eli. I don't know if they're on, but if they are, hello, Leslie, Neil, and Eli. You know, texture and things are so personalized, and there's not a whole lot of standards for the visually impaired community, as I've learned. Even for orientation, it seemed like there was some question about which way, like a cut on the top left of a paper or top right of a paper was kind of the standard for orientation. So everything is very personalized. And then for me, I didn't know a whole lot about Braille, but once I started learning about Braille, just over the course of the weekend and talking with Neil and Leslie and Eli and others, I felt like it was really important for me to be able to understand Braille more and bring it back to my students and work on projects because as I learn, Braille literacy is really low. I mean, Build a Better Book is amazing to create these interactive experiences, book and game experiences for visually impaired students. But I was shocked how low the literacy rate is for students who need to read Braille. So we started working on some projects, and we'll go to the next slide. This is the interactive Braille cell. This was something I created after working at the Build a Better Book conference. And so we'll play this was version 1. So we'll play the video. Oh, Colleen, I think we need to unmute.
I did it where I was muted again. Oh my goodness. I'm sorry, y'all.
That's okay.
Are you using the secret? It doesn't look like you're using the secret code thing there.
Secret code?
Oh, the extension with the secret code that Eric made?
I will talk about that. So this is version 1, and you can see it's just a large interactive Braille cell. And I was kind of surprised that I thought there would be a lot of like a real commercial version of this, and there really isn't, especially one that's inexpensive. So I sent this version 1 out to California, to Sonoma County, my new friends, Neil, Leslie, and Eli, and they got it. And we actually worked on reviewing it. So I then did iteration for version 2, which I think will be on the next slide. So here's the, well, the next slide just shows you that you can prototype. What I think is really important to get across that to educators and then the students are teaching, that you can prototype a lot with just a little bit of programming, cardboard box, some copper tape or tin foil, and some alligator clips. So that was kind of the point of this slide, that you can prototype. You don't need the laser cutter at first. It's really nice to have, but at first you can just kind of prototype in a short amount of time, which is cardboard and a copper tape. The next slide will be the video. So here's version 2.
C is for cat. Cats like to meow. C.
And now do.
So awesome.
A.
A is for apple. Here is the sound of me eating this yummy apple. A.
Now I will do R.
R is for rain. Sometimes it showers, other times it rains hard. This is the sound of hard rain.
Okay, so, you know, I shared this with Neil, Leslie, and Eli, and they really felt it was a really good start to go from a unique project that can be kind of a one-time experience to hopefully something that could be reproducible and used by students all over. You know, it's made with Scratch programming, which is free, and it's just right now it's hooked up to Makey Makey. And, you know, when I was speaking with Leslie about, you know, young learners learning to read and write Braille, she said that there's really no universal sound library, which again, I was shocked. I thought there'd be some kind of standard universal sound library for visually impaired students, and there's not. So we started discussing that if you could create a tool that allows the educator or parent to put in sounds or draw upon a sound library where they then can also, you know, I have my interactive Braille cell right here, and it's not just for the young students learning Braille, but it's also for their sighted friends, for their family members, right? So it's not just for the visually impaired student, it's for everyone to kind of learn more about it. And once you start adding these sounds, it could be really powerful. You can connect it to Brown Bear, you can connect it to some type of math program, and music. As I've learned that music is just, obviously, visually impaired students love music, but they don't exactly have the tools or accessibility a lot of times to learn music. So it's possible that, you know, we could take something like this, because music is done with Braille also, the same 6 dotted cell. So it's possible to adapt that to music. And so can we really turn this into a real usable resource? All the other videos I have are great. I think they can definitely be built by educators and students for, you know, very good tactile interactive experiences for visually impaired users and students. But what can we do to actually take something like this interactive Braille cell or something else like one of the games that Janet showed or Stacy showed, where we can actually have these games be, you know, distributed throughout the world? You know, some ideas you could, obviously Scratch programming is free, so you can keep adding to the sound library. Makey Makeys are inexpensive. Computers are inexpensive, and laser cut diagrams. You might need access to a laser cutter, but the laser cut diagram to create something like this that would be more robust, you know, the diagram can be free, and then you just need to laser cut some balsa wood. So we do think that it's possible to make these into real usable resources. Go to the next slide. Okay, the last game I wanted to share was the interactive Tetris, bridging the digital and board game world. As we've learned from, as I learned from my friends out in Build a Better Book, games are so important to visually impaired students, and there's a lack of good games. And then social media and digital media are really important to visually impaired students also. So I got to thinking, well, what about taking a video game and kind of merging it with kind of a board game idea? So I took the idea of Tetris, and we'll play the video.
job. You build level 1. Your current score is 100. Great job. You build level 6. Your current score is 600. Great job. You build level 7. Your current score is 700. Great job. You build level 8. Your current score is 800. Excellent. You win.
So the idea is to take Tetris, the game, the digital game, and then use these 3D printed Tetris pieces, which are very easy to design in Tinkercad and print. Or you can use a Cameo or Cricut cutter and use paper to cut out the designs also. Add some copper tape, add the game board, which I also just made with the Cameo digital cutter. It's an 8-inch by 8-inch board. Do a little bit of programming, and I copied what Makey Makey has on for their Scratch extension, the idea of having multiple keys connected at the same time. So all of a sudden, it's really not that complex of a project for us. This is just a prototype right now, but to have a game where in Tetris, you obviously have to keep hitting each level, and every time a student hits each level, they have digital prompts. And a lot of visually impaired students have some sight, and as I've learned, they need high contrast. So the idea also was to take the digital portion and to make it high contrast. So again, you're kind of having the game for all types of sighted and visually impaired students. So just a prototype, a lot of different connections, but I think it's definitely possible to make something like this where, again, one day maybe a student group can actually, really make this something that can be distributed. And then to finish up my presentation, I really wanted to just share that, I learned so much about universal design from Build a Better Book, Tom's Makey Makey seminar, and from the Cooper Hewitt Museum. This was a really cool book. So it actually talks about Build a Better Book in there also. And it's just about, they had an exhibit about, an interactive exhibit about Beyond the Senses about a year and a half ago. I did not get to see the exhibit, but if you get to read the book, which is about $20, I think, it's really cool. There's a lot of great ideas and illustrations and photos about how you can bring universal design to everyone. And to be honest, it seems like to me that universal design is better than just sighted design, because you just take a map and all of a sudden you take the sense of, let's add tactile nature to the map. It's better for everyone. That way people actually understand what landscape is and depth and design, as opposed to just looking at, mountains, which are two-dimensional. So it's actually better for everyone anyway. And next, actually, I'm very excited. Monday, May 20th, I start working on a Build a Better Book project with 2 AP computer science classes for about 10 to 12 days. It's going to be modeled off of Build a Better Book Building 61's programs. And I'm excited because I don't know what direction they're going to take it in, because they have extensive programming backgrounds. So we're going to see some interesting projects, I think. I know.
Awesome. That was amazing. I'm like, my mind is reeling. I'm still thinking about the Tetris thing, and I'm thinking about the blend of physical and digital and like going back and forth, and the idea of creating a digital game that's physical, but I can still play it. Like it's still playing online and I'm playing it physically. Like, I don't know, that was really cool. And I'm trying to think of like other games I could do that to, because that just sounds amazing. It's 1 o'clock already. You guys shared so much great stuff. I wanted to thank everybody for everything you've done. We have a little bit of time for Q&A. Well, we don't really have time for Q&A, but I will honor the fact that we need to do it. I had lost the chat during my, they've all been answered apparently. Oh, Stacy answered the question. Yes, if you missed any of the webinar, it's gonna be on YouTube. We keep it on our Makey Makey YouTube. It'll be on the blog post. And then someone asked about live scribe pins for interactive elements of books. That sounds cool. I've never heard of it. I had never seen the Blackboard. What was that called again, Janet?
That's the sensational Blackboard. It's really awesome. Super simple. Sensationalblackboard.com.
Yeah, that is really cool. And then Daniel asked if the shapes and materials are posted somewhere. So maybe that's about your Tetris project, Ian. I think you could read Tinkercad.
That was an 8-inch squares, so that's what I did. I just went into Tinkercad, and then you can just export to SVG file type, and then you could use the Cricut or Cameo to use the paper cutter.
Just a question
Yeah.
Oh, on the Q&A about the Spectrum's rings. So just a quick clarification on those. Those were actually invented by a grad student here at CU Boulder. So it's been a fun process to see their company really take off. We started working with them a while ago, and they've been super responsive to kind of making changes in their app in order to make it a better fit for our project, which has just been terrific. But they recently got acquired by Sphero. So if you're looking to test them out, you can get them on sphero.com.
Yeah. I thought that was really cool that I recognize it as Sphero, which is Boulder as well. So that's why I was like, hey, that's cool that all the
so they're still in the neighborhood, which is really nice, but it's great. They're just a small group within Sphero, but they've been really helpful, I think, at listening to kind of some of the things that we were hoping to do in order to make like sound sets shareable amongst different users. They've helped us out with that. So that's great.
So Daniel, did we answer your question? He said, I don't understand his question, but I think it was about Tetris. And I had been locked out of the chat while I was screen sharing. I got to figure out a way to solve that. So,
I was just going to say other designs, a lot of the other designs that students have created are available on our website through a design gallery. And so some of those, there are both kind of project tutorials for projects you can do with students, but also design files if you want to try kind of replicating something that has been designed to just see how it feels or to create a resource for students.
And we already have a link to your site on the original, what's it called? The original blog post. Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just buildabetterbook.org.
Here at the end. And then, yes, we also, y'all have shown the Bare Conductive boards a lot, but I don't know that anyone ever said that's what it's called. So Bare Conductive is really cool. We used to have Bare Conductive pins or paint, I thought, in our Inventor Booster Pack, but we've kind of gone through it. They make conductive paint, which is really cool. I know Ian's working on his own conductive paint recipe, but they also, Bare Conductive is a way to kind of do sound effects without a computer. So like you actually put the sounds onto the board, and you can still have the physical interactivity. So yes, Daniel, we're sharing all of these things with you afterwards, and some of it's already there. You just have to go looking. But it'll be probably tomorrow morning. Still, it takes a long time for my Mac to process the hour video and me cutting out the little parts of bunny ears, etc. That's just kidding. So thanks again, everybody. I hope we answered all your questions. On the blog post about this webinar, you're welcome to add more questions that I can answer later or the team can answer later. And we can also, you can put those questions on YouTube when the YouTube video comes up. But if you subscribe to our playlist, every time we do a webinar, those will show up. If you subscribe to our newsletter, which I'm pretty sure everyone on this call probably already is, because that's where the majority of our registrants come from. This was our last webinar for the school year. So I'm really thank everybody for coming on and for doing a lunchtime. This is our first lunchtime trial. I know all the Australians were very upset with us and the New Zealanders because it's 3 a.m. there. They were like, we want to watch too. I was like, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. But we will bring the webinar series back in the fall when school starts again. And we will actually, we are going to have a new product at the end of this month. And we will have some webinars around that, sort of like live Q&A, probably more like a live Q&A than a webinar, but we'll still use Zoom. So we love you all. We thank you for coming. And thank you so much, Stacy, Jana, and Ian, and Kat, and your third person who's sitting there, and I don't think we ever said her name.
Gigi.
Gigi.
On our team too.
Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom. Yeah.
People are interested in kind of seeing what projects are happening. A lot of people that came to our workshop this February have been sharing what they're doing on Twitter.
Yeah.
So we're just Build Better Book on Twitter, and it's been awesome to see just some of the different projects that different groups are doing if people want a little inspiration.
It's really cool. I'm really glad I like went to the session and figured out it was way more than my brain had initially thought. So thanks for sharing. You're awesome, you guys. Have a great
Thanks for having us. It's been fun.
All right. See you at ISTE.
Bye.